I'm Ron Gallagher at Maximum Velocity Physical Therapy, and you're listening to HYPERSPEED Radio. You don't have to live in pain, whether you're running, swimming, playing a team sport, or just everyday fitness. We bridge a gap between medicine and strength and conditioning to help you break through at MVPT.
What's up, everybody? This is Ron from Maximum Velocity Physical Therapy here in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I have a brand new toy I plan on doing some educational videos using called eGlass. eGlass means that I can draw stuff, and if you've been in the clinic, you know I like to draw stuff, use my whiteboard. I'm going to introduce this thing that I call the Tournament of Treatment, which is just a fun way of saying over the years, now 20 years, I have learned about things and done things in school, and the way that I'm going about my treatment has definitely changed. And basically it comes down to this type of tournament. Why do I do one thing and not the other thing? So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each type of thing that a person can do to help a patient and describe why I do what I do and why it's based on research, because everything I do is based on research, which a lot of people don't realize. And as you can see behind me, we have racks and rigs here at Maximum Velocity, so you might know where this direction is going. So here we have two sides of the tournament, and I've ranked 1 through 8 the types of treatment that a person can do, and then 1 through 8 on the other side. And we're going to go through each one. So this is just like the NCAA tournament in basketball. That's what I was inspired by doing this. And what's fun about the tournament is that there's some upsets. And occasionally in patient care, we have some upsets. But I'm talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of people, thousands and thousands of hours. These are the things that are tried and true, and it's all based on research, some experience. So the number 1 seed to my left is strength. The number 8 seed is cupping, massage, a treatment style called FMS, which we'll get into in a minute, Pilates, cold. Cold's going to include ice bath, ice packs, and cryotherapy. Manipulation, which is cracking, and traction. And then on my right side is mechanotherapy, red laser, dry needles, heat. Heat includes sauna and hot packs. Mobilization, which is different than manipulation, which we'll get to. Stretching, this is slow static stretching. This is not dynamic stretching. And then we have yoga and rest. So let's get to the bracket, shall we? Strength is defined in this example as the maximum amount of load with the maximum amount of range of motion, and it's compound in its delivery. And essentially in the last 8 years with Maximum Velocity, with racks and rigs, we know that strength is essentially the number 1 impairment on just about everybody. And if we address the strength issues, the body's ability to tolerate stress is better. And essentially our athletes, our people with activities of daily living, need to be able to withstand stress. So I paired that up against cupping. Cupping is a technique where they put a suction cup and they try to draw quote unquote blood towards the skin, which you get those big old hickeys, those big circle hickeys. I'm here to tell you there's absolutely zero research to back it. And it's not even an ancient Chinese art like they thought it was. It's placebo. As plain as day, it's as good as placebo. So the first winner is strength. The next game is massage versus FMS. FMS. Massage has absolutely no research to back it. I have completely removed it from my practice, and during my training, that was a primary mode of treatment that I used the first couple years of my career. The problem with it is that it feels good. Of course it feels good, but there's no change in inflammation, there's no change in swelling, there's no change in recovery with or without massage. The FMS is the functional movement screen, and when it was originally presented, I thought, oh man, this is a really great thing. But the ability to reproduce it is poor. And basically what it is a series of tests that help the practitioner decide if there's some movement errors or not with regard to how people move. So functional movement screen. And the long-term data on it shows that it doesn't change performance, it doesn't change pain, and it's not predictable. So in my opinion, my patients deserve better, and I don't necessarily do FMS, but in this case, FMS versus massage, one is passive, the other one is active. Active, I think, will always be passive, so we're going to give the nod to FMS. The third seed versus the sixth seed is Pilates versus cold. Now, Pilates gets a lot of attention because it's a good form of exercise. Notice that I use the word good. Good is the enemy of great. The problem with Pilates, well, we're going to get into it, but Pilates can build a little bit of stability. It can change your body composition a little bit, but essentially it's not necessarily strength training. The angle at which the person is pushing is oftentimes parallel with gravity, which in a low functioning situation is good, but for a high functioning situation it's not. Cold, actually, we see from research that the more exposures a person has to cold, the less their inflammatory will respond to inflammatory situations. So in a way, applying cold, especially often, creates an over-recovery type of a situation. Again, it's passive, and I think should be used very, very sparingly, and it does have an anti-inflammatory effect. However, it needs to be used in big, ugly situations. So in this case, some exercise is better than none. So we're going to give the nod here to Pilates. Now, the 2 seed versus the 7 seed is manipulation versus traction. Now, manipulation is oftentimes described as chiropractic care. Now, this is by no means a knock on chiros, because there's good chiros and there's bad chiros. There's good PTs and bad PTs. There's good doctors and bad doctors. PTs are trained in manipulation as well. They typically don't use it as often as chiros, but manipulation has very limited results when it comes to how the research shows. It is a passive treatment, once again, where the practitioner applies a force, or in this case a thrust, to generate a cavitation or a pop, and that pop does relieve pain. But the reason why it relieves pain is not because it's correcting the problem, because it's changing the person's perception of the problem. So a thing called manual therapy induced analgesia means that for knee pain, I can crack your neck. For elbow pain, I can crack your neck. For back pain, I can crack your neck. And your body's going to experience a change in pain because the sensation changed. Traction is a device that pulls the spine apart. The person lays down, gets their neck fastened or the back fastened, and it creates traction or pulling. That traction force creates suction, and the suction does have an effect on the disc that it pulls it in. But as soon as the person is upright again against gravity, then we lose all the effects of traction. Traction is very temporary, and it is not as good as movement. And in my opinion, I don't have a traction table. Haven't used traction in 10 or 15 years. It has no bearing on feeling better. The research shows that there's really no benefit to it. So in this case, some benefit is better than none, and we're going to give the nod to manipulation. Okay, moving across, forward here to the top. Mechanotherapy versus red laser. Now, mechanotherapy is a term used to describe exercise providing stress, and that stress causes our body to adapt. That adaptation creates symptom relief. It's the best way to treat tendon problems, connective tissue problems. Around here I use the term mechanical problems all the time. Mechanical means that something isn't strong enough, something can't tolerate stress, something is stiff, physically cannot move in a way that is pain-free. Mechanotherapy is the best way to treat that. Red laser is a device that applies a outside force to inside, and honestly has no effect whatsoever and is just as good as placebo, and in this case has no therapeutic effect whatsoever. So we're going to give the nod to mechanotherapy. Okay, dry needles versus heat. Here's a big topic. Dry needles is when they take these really, really tiny small gauge needles and they poke holes in the tendon. It restarts an inflammatory response as a result of poking these little tiny holes that your body has to fill in. That process does happen, and there is research to say that the person experiences a change in symptoms. However, I think the problem is flawed from the very beginning. Here's why. You're applying a chemical process to a mechanical problem. So yes, the symptoms do change, and there is minor temporary relief, but I hear every day from an evaluation how dry needles did not correct my problem. The problem is mechanical. It is stiff or it's weak, and it cannot tolerate stress. I cannot stress that enough. No pun intended. Dry needles are good, but they are not as good as mechanotherapy. So we might as well just move mechanotherapy along here. And heat is passive, has a change in temperature, but it increases circulation, but sometimes that circulation isn't what you want. If you have an open inflammatory process that you apply heat to, sometimes you can make the symptoms worse. Passive, two passive techniques here, but the dry needles are far better, and I've considered getting trained. It's a really, really expensive treatment for very, very small return in therapeutic value. So we're gonna move dry needles along. It's 1000% better than heat, but nowhere near as good as mechanotherapy. Now, here 3 versus 6 is mobility, mobilization in this case, versus stretching. Now, I pin these two guys together because it's a really interesting thing that happens when athletes come into the clinic for an evaluation. Stretching doesn't help. Foam rolling doesn't help. I would put those two things in the same category. So stretching and foam rolling are essentially the same stress. Mobilization is physically making the joint move better. So moving the joint to a place that it moves with better range of motion is different than flexibility. Flexibility is the ease in which the motion occurs. Mobility is related to the joint position. So I can measure that. I can create change with that. So mobility beats stretching, and we see in lots and lots and lots of social media how these mobilization programs are happening, but it really comes down to flexibility. It's not moving the joint, it's moving the muscles and the connective tissue. So we want to be sure that we're doing mobility. If we're limited in our mobility, and if we are applying stretching, it's because we have a flexibility problem, which honestly is always a strength problem. So in my opinion, there's no reason to stretch. There's lots of reasons to do mobility, and stability will always be mobility and stretching. So we're going to move mobility along here and eliminate stretching. Every day I hear people say how much they love yoga. And today I pinned yoga versus rest. Yoga is amazing. I do yoga. I love yoga. What it doesn't do, first of all, what it does do is it changes your brain. It is amazing, absolutely amazing for depression, for happiness, and it is a very valuable exercise or lifestyle. Don't get me wrong. Rest, however, has more detrimental effects than it does positive effects. If you have a stiffness problem, it's going to get stiffer. If you have a weakness problem, it's going to get weaker. And the longer you rest it, the bigger the problem is going to be. So yoga, what it doesn't do is it doesn't change performance in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't help runners be more efficient. It doesn't help athletes perform at the top of their game. All it does is change your mood, and if that's all you want, then that's perfect. If you're using yoga to try to be a better runner or a better athlete, there are better ways to do your cross-training program. And yoga, in my opinion, according to research, not my opinion, according to research, has limited benefits. But in this case, we're moving yoga across. Turn this guy off. Okay, so now we're through the first round, on to the quarters. Strength versus FMS. This is a really, really important game here. Strength changes the body's ability to tolerate stress. And if proper barbell progression happens, the person is allowed to work against stress and become less painful and more functional. FMS, remember, is the functional movement screen, and there's no evidence to show that it changes performance, that it's reliable, and strength training beats FMS. Now, here we are, Pilates versus manipulation. Pilates is a low load applied with the force parallel to gravity. So that's a very, very low load, even with all four springs. And as much of a challenge as that is, it's not bringing on strength. Got to be clear about that. It is hard and good, but it's not strength. Manipulation can, if it's used appropriately, which is a big caveat here, the manipulation has to be local to the problem and it has to be the right technique. So in this case, I'm going to give the nod to Pilates, which is turning my back on a lot of the training that I have as a professional, because we're taught that our hands are the cure-all. But movement is probably better than somebody doing something to you. So we're going to give the nod to movement. We already talked about mechanotherapy, but let's reiterate. Mechanotherapy is a load applied to the connective tissue, tendon, muscle, to drive an adaptation that forces the body to heal. It's training the body from the inside out, and that's always better than outside in. So while there is good research to support dry needles, I'm saying from the very beginning, we want the body to correct itself. And if you go to a practitioner who does not apply stress, they only do things to you, they're teaching you how to over-recover and under-prepare for the stress that comes. So dry needles in isolation. Now, if you're doing dry needles and mechanotherapy, I think that could be a very effective combination. But why would I do something that's less beneficial than mechanotherapy? I don't know, which is why I only do mechanotherapy. So mechanotherapy moves along and is the third member of the final four. Mobilization versus yoga. Now, mobilization can be a mobility program that you pick up from Joe Schmo. Doesn't even have to be a physical therapist. It could be anybody. If you're limited in range of motion and you apply a mobility solution to that, that could be effective. Yoga is oftentimes loaded with your body weight, which in the very beginning is a beneficial force. As the body accumulates its ability to tolerate stress from yoga, the benefits get less and less and less, which is why the postures have to get harder and harder. But mobilization versus yoga, I would give the nod to yoga. Again, turning my back on training, turning my back on a lot of continuing education and a lot of quote-unquote expertise that my colleagues may or may talk about. But active movement is oftentimes better than another person doing something to you. Unless this mobility is really your issue, I would choose yoga because there is a small weight-bearing change that eventually affects the body's ability to heal. Here we are in the final four. Strength versus Pilates. Mechanotherapy versus yoga. We will choose strength over Pilates because the load is higher. The ground reaction force we're running is somewhere between 2 and 7 times your body weight in ground reaction force. If you don't have the ability to push against a heavy load, you will not be able to close the gap on what your connective tissue can tolerate versus what you're trying to put through it. Oh, he just does strength training. I don't think I need that. Everybody needs strength training. 100% of people. If I pull 100 people at the mall, 100 people are going to need strength. So at the end of the day, strength beats Pilates, hands down, bar none. And it is for the sole purpose of an increase in load. Now, mechanotherapy versus yoga. Mechanotherapy is a specific stress applied to the body to drive an adaptation, while yoga is a wide-ranging amount of force. And the person doing the yoga may or may not know what stress is good or bad, and the instructor isn't usually involved in the specifics of what the person's problem is. So at the end of the day, the mechanotherapy is much more specific to the person's problem, while the yoga is good motion and the mental benefits are through the roof. Highly, highly beneficial mode of treatment. It is not as good as mechanotherapy. So mechanotherapy and strength are in the finals. At the end of the day, the body is trying to learn how to tolerate stress. And if I do something to the body, I can't mimic the stress that the person has to deal with. So the skill, in my opinion, in removing a person's symptoms is trying to teach this body how to tolerate stress. And if I apply anti-inflammatory techniques to mechanical problems, I'm going to chase my tail. And essentially opening a clinic around these two concepts is why my outcomes are through the roof and why people get better very, very quickly. I hear every single day, foam rolling doesn't help, massage didn't help, dry needles didn't help, ice, heat, ultrasound, which is not on here, over and 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 over again. At the end of the day, you have to create an environment where the strength and the mechanotherapy, the tissues have to be prepared enough to tolerate the stress that the person's trying to put through their body. And that's how we get runners back to running, athletes back to running and cutting and training. And at the end of the day, a lot of the things that are on this board are helpful, and they do inflict a change. But stepwise, when we break each thing down individually, what's better than the next thing and what has happened over these last 20 years of continuing education and listening to the best at this and the best at that and the best at the other thing is strength and mechanotherapy win. That's why maximum velocity is doing the things that they do, and that's why our outcomes are through the roof, and you could be next. And if this style of therapy hasn't been done, even if you've had your problem for years and years and years, 20 years worth of neck pain goes away, 3 weeks. 15 years hip pain, have to stop working because of hip pain, goes away, 3 weeks, a month, by applying strength and mechanotherapy. When shots, dry needles, stretching, foam rolling, all didn't change symptoms whatsoever. It happens every day around here. So we'll turn these guys down. Doesn't matter. Turn it down a little bit. Anyway, I'm Ron from Maximum Velocity Physical Therapy here in Las Vegas, and this is the tournament of treatment. Peace out. Trust your body, trust your training, believe, and you'll get to where you need to go. Ron's out. Peace.